Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by truck and 4x4 enthusiasts. I'm your host and founder of Classic 4x4, Chris Piccone. Please make sure to review and subscribe to the podcast on your listening platform. Follow and like Classic 4x4 on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our channel and check out our episodes on YouTube. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you sell your truck or 4x4. Visit classic4x4.com for more details. Thank you for listening and enjoy the episode. Well, hello, Classic 4x4 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and this is the first quarter 2025 collector truck and 4x4 market update and outlook. And joining us again today, he seems to be a regular on these quarterly market updates and outlooks, is Brian Ellis, CEO and co-founder of Fourbie Exchange. What's going on, Brian?
Hey, Chris, such a pleasure to be here. It's been a really great start to the year, just a lot of interesting trends to dig into, a lot of change in the environment. So really excited to dig into this quarter. And I don't want to revisit any of our predictions from the end of last year because I think that's just been a crazy start to the year.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. We were very optimistic at the end of last year. We saw some stabilization in the collector vehicle market, some balancing out, and saw some appreciation. And in the first quarter of this year, we saw a lot of that come to fruition. But I'm actually going to bring up a little bit later a prediction that we made that also came to fruition,
nice.
Which is affecting the markets. But we're going to run through today on today's show. We're going to talk about the broader collector vehicle markets, review those, review the data from the first quarter. We're going to talk about what everybody wants to hear about is tariffs and how the tariffs affect our collector vehicle market or lack thereof. We're going to get a little bit deeper into marketplaces, some trends, changes, things that we're seeing in the within different collector vehicle marketplaces. And then we're going to get a little more granular on the truck and 4x4 markets, talk about some data there, and then finish up with what everybody really wants to hear, which is what's hot and what's not in the collector truck and 4x4 markets. But as you alluded to, we were very excited coming out of 2024, extremely excited for 2025. A lot of that excitement came to fruition in the first quarter of 2025. I mean, we broke a bunch of records in the collector vehicle markets, but we've seen some balancing out. We've seen some appreciation, but not so fast because we're actually recording mid-April right now. So though it didn't happen in the first quarter, we had some volatility came back in the first 2 weeks of April, which we'll talk a little bit more about too. So my sentiment is still very optimistic overall, but I went from excited optimistic to cautiously optimistic. But before we get into it, what's going on with you and the team at Fourbie Exchange?
Yeah, man, we're cruising. It was a great start to the new year. Traffic was through the roof. Inquiries were through the roof. And those are really the things we look for, right? Is are we attracting individuals to the site and are they inquiring? What is that ratio of inventory to inquiries? So really strong start to the year. Really excited about that. And behind that is my two partners, Garrett and Joel. Garrett has done a phenomenal job onboarding a bunch of new sellers and just really being integral to developing the products that we have out there, right? We'll talk about marketplaces and what that environment looks like, but it's all about making that distinction, and it's all about making that whole process seamless. And some of the auction platforms have done a really good job with that. So Garrett's been instrumental on helping us understand what are those product requirements. And then on the other side, you have Joel, who is really the backbone. He's the guy who's leading all the technology and all the development behind the scenes. So he's implementing and leading a lot of the product enhancements, but in the background, also building out something pretty cool that I think listeners are going to be excited for by the time we get to our Q2 roundup.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm on your site all the time. I use your site. I've bought personally off your site for my personal collection. I represent my client vehicles on your site all the time, get great leads from qualified buyers. So, you guys are the segment player in the truck and 4x4 markets, hands down. We're going to talk about segment players when we talk about marketplaces too, because the segment players are gaining market share rapidly. But one thing I will say is Garrett, your chief revenue officer, who really deals with the sellers. I mean, he does such a great job curating the right inventory for the site. He does such a good job. And the man behind the screen, Joel, I know you had mentioned it to me. on a DL basis, and I know we can't get too deep into it, but you have Fourbie 2.0 coming out.
Yeah.
When do you think you're going to see Fourbie 2.0 come to fruition?
I think we're within the next couple of weeks. I'm actually seeing updates coming through live from our developers, so going back and forth. And I'll tell you, Joel's the coolest guy you've ever met, just that, low key, but I've never seen him have so much swagger that he has right now. I call him our yeoman coder sometimes because he lives on a farm in the middle of rural Connecticut, but it's just this nasty coder, just absolutely fantastic at building that tech roadmap. And he's got a lot of swag behind him. So I'm excited. But next couple of weeks, you'll see some really big material changes, and that's going to help kind of underpin a lot of additional changes in the next few months too. But you
Love to
talked
hear
about that inventory, and really appreciate the shout out. That's been a big focus. Garrett's done a great job of curating that inventory. And fortunately, we partnered with some really good sellers, yourself included. And I'll tell you, I got a text message the other day from my dad saying, that Jeep Grand Wagoneer SJ is nice. And that's like a high praise from Mike Ellis. But no, you've brought some really beautiful pieces to the site. And I know you've got another one out on auction right now, but really appreciated just developing that content and showing the diversity of the product. Just really appreciated just some really cool pieces you're bringing to market. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, before we even get into it, I'll talk about that SJ. So I have a client, and I'm advising, marketing, representing the sale of his 1987 Jeep Grand Wagoneer, but it's not your dad's Grand Wagoneer.
No.
It's a heritage build. It's got like the Cherokee S decal package on it. It's a really cool turquoise blue.
Yeah.
It's a full refurbishment, powertrain and body refurbishment. Swapped out the original Grand Wagoneer bucket seats for an older SJ bench seat.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing just has eyes. It's got he did professional covers to kind of make it look like seat covers, to give it that like old school like Indian blanket look. And that's not even the powertrain. That rebuilt, performance modified AMC 360. I mean, he just has done everything
Beautiful.
right. That thing is ready to turn heads on the road and just conquer any off-road terrain there ever was. That's cool. I have a couple Land Cruisers out there right now, J Series Land Cruisers, a 40 series and a 45. I have that client actually is a renowned architect. He actually has his doctorate in architecture, and that's his primary gig. He's very well renowned in his space, but he's like us, man. He just like loves vintage trucks and 4x4s, and he started designing these things. And then he is based here in the US, but he has Costa Rican heritage, has relationships and family in Costa Rica. And he started working with a build shop that he actually ended up literally just acquiring to build his stuff. So he designs these J Series Land Cruisers, and he just does such a great job. And now he's commissioning and oversees all those builds, and he just does such a good job. I love working with him, and I love representing the sale of his trucks because they're absolutely impeccable. They're all frame off, nut and bolt, investment quality restorations. That my favorite are the dashboards. Have you seen the dashboards and what he does with the dashboards?
Yeah, man.
He completely cleans, anybody that's familiar with the J Series Land Cruisers, especially the 40s, the 43s, the 45s, they have that like the weird like pull switches on the dashboards. He removes all of that and puts modern LED lighting and switching in, and redesigns it all, and then puts air conditioning and heating in, and then has those vents Frenched in. Like, I mean, they're absolutely amazing. So any of our listeners out there that want to check them out, they're on my website, classic4x4.com. If you know anybody that's interested, don't hesitate to reach out. But let's hop into the collector vehicle markets. A little overview and some trends that I've seen so far year to date. We came out of the gate in 2025 like rip roaring, man. Like February was insanity. That when I talk about the data in February, I was just like, It's absolutely wild. But you know, what we're really seeing is there's an indication that the markets are balancing out. The overall collector vehicle markets are balancing out. They're appreciating, which is kind of a continuation of what we saw in the end of 2024. 2023 was tumultuous. 2024 was a little volatile in the first quarter. The second quarter, 2024. The volatility subsided. It was a little unremarkable, but we started to see the data really tell us that the market was balancing out. Q3 in 2024 showed signs of appreciation across all three metrics, which I kind of think we may have seen a bottom right around there. And then Q4, we saw minimal volatility, but we again saw signs of appreciation. So 2024 really indicated the market had balanced out and started to appreciate, and we're seeing that continue in the first quarter of 2025. And we had a bunch of milestones in the first quarter of 2025. So let's dig into the data, man.
Yeah, man.
So January, and I'll kind of take a step back for all of our listeners out there that aren't familiar with the metrics that I really use as key indicators for the collector vehicle markets. There's really three metrics. The first is sell-through. Mm-hmm. Sell-through is the percentage of the vehicles that came to the market that successfully sold. So for example, if 10 vehicles come to the market and 6 of them successfully sell, that means you have a 60% sell-through. So I'll talk a lot about sell-through when I talk about these metrics. The other big metric that I do talk about is average sale price. So all those vehicles that sold through, what was their average sale price in the market? And then the last metric is dollar volume. Dollar volume is basically the total dollar volume of all those vehicles that successfully sold through. So in the first quarter of this year, we'll start with January. January's year over year sell-through, it actually increased 1%, which is nothing crazy, but at 76%. 76 is a very healthy sell-through. So though we only saw a year-over-year increase in January of 1%, it's still very healthy at 76%. Average sale price saw a little bit of regression, but again, only about 7%. But the average sale price was strong at $61,946. But the real proof is in the pudding, the dollar volume. Yes, we saw a little regression in January of about 10%, nothing crazy, but we still did $583 million worth of transactions. So, I mean, that's pretty rock solid.
Yeah.
And what attributed to a lot of that data in January, we had the Scottsdale auctions, which were RM Sotheby's and Barrett Jackson have 2 big auctions. And then we also had Mecum Kissimmee. So though the players that add a lot of the value to those metrics were the premium in-person event style auctions, don't get me wrong, the online players are still the dominant factor, right?
Yeah.
So hands down, the online players still dominate a majority of the market share in the space. My biggest takeaway from January, and this is huge for us collector truck and 4x4 enthusiasts, is we saw a lot of big dollar transactions, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 transactions that were trucks and 4x4s. And we're going to talk about some of those transactions as we get we talk about the truck and 4x4 market. So my biggest takeaway from January of this year, hands down, is that trucks and 4x4s, collector trucks and 4x4s have entered into a whole new realm and now are the new blue chip collector vehicles. Wild, right?
Right. That's great. Love to see it.
No, and those big dollar transactions were mostly all Action Line GMs and and crew cab, especially dense side and bump side F-250s. But they were very isolated. But there were a lot of other big dollar transactions that we saw in January. February, my friends. All of our audience, February was wild. The metrics were out of control, and we actually had a couple historic events happen in February in the collector vehicle market. So sell-through in February was up 8% year over year to 71%. Again, anytime I'm seeing sell-through over 70%, I like it. It's strong. Average sale price, you ready for this? Year over year, average sale price was up 54% year
Unreal.
over year,
That's
to
nuts.
$89,366. So the average vehicle that sold in the published markets in February was $89,366, up 54% year over year. If that doesn't tell you the market is strong and is appreciating, I don't know what else does.
Yeah,
Right?
that's as cut and dry as it gets. Yeah.
But
Well,
dollar volume was up 77% year over year to $428 million in February. So, I mean, talk about strength and strength in the market, hands down. But we had, some historical events happen in February. The first historical events is two of the top five highest sales period, in history, since this data has been recorded, happened in February. And both of them actually happened at RM Sotheby's auctions. One was a 1954 Mercedes-Benz W196R Strom Wagon. I'm
could
not
be.
into
Yeah.
cars. Yeah, sounds cool. Like I'm a truck guy, but sounds cool. But what's insane is that thing traded for 51,155,000 euros. All right. What is that in
Yeah.
US dollars? $57 million.
Good grief.
Bonkers,
Good
man.
grief. Right.
The other, the second top transaction that happened, top five transaction that happened in February was a 1964 Ferrari 250 LM by Scaglietti. Sounds cool. We all know that low production Ferraris are always very desirable,
Yep.
and desirable it is at 34,880,000 euros, which is a lot in euros, but if we kind of convert that to US dollars, that's $39 million, man.
That's
We had
healthy.
almost $100 million worth of transactions happen in two cars in February.
Unreal.
But that's not the amazing record-breaking thing we had happen in February. For the first time in history, year-to-date sales crossed $1 billion in the month of February. So in this modern collector vehicle era, we every year we cross $1 billion in dollar volume in sales. It's just, when does it happen? And it traditionally happens usually, like, depending on how strong the market is, like the second or third quarter. We usually don't see it happen in the first quarter. And if we're going to see it happen in the first quarter, in the second month of the first quarter. So we crossed $1 billion worth of sales in the published markets for the first time in history in February. So
unbelievable.
Talk about strength.
To contextualize that, Chris, last year was what? When we sat here last year, the total market was what? About 4.4 billion.
Yeah.
So to be at 1 billion at this point and headed into spring where it starts to get hotter traditionally, you're at a $6 billion pace. Like that's just absurd.
Absolutely wild, man. We could have a record-breaking year this year for collector vehicle transactions.
Totally.
And then moving on to March's data, sell-through was up about 5% year over year to 67%. Again, we're right around that 70%, so we're good. Obviously, always want to see sell-through above 70%. It's just an indicator of a balanced market. Average sale price was down 18% in March, but still very strong at $62,475. Dollar volume did tick back a little bit in March. It was down about 17%, but we still did $351 million worth of transactions, which after, that insane February, I'm not surprised. But the March data is a little bit skewed because Gooding and Company and Broad Arrow usually Gooding and Company and Broad Arrow have their Amelia sales and RM Sotheby's in Miami. The RM Sotheby's, which is probably the biggest volume player out of those three sales, that one took place in February. So the RM Sotheby's data is in February, not in March. So when I look at the regression that happened in average sale price and dollar volume, that's mostly because the RM Sotheby's sale, which is a big dollar sale, happened in February, not in March. But overall, awesome first quarter, performed very well. If anybody thinks the collector vehicle market is on the skids, they're wrong. We are balanced out, we're appreciating.
Mhm.
My outlook on the collector vehicle market in 2025, like I said earlier, cautiously optimistic. 2024, and back to what I said earlier, I made a prediction at the end of last year in 2024, and I had one caveat that 2025 was going to be strong. And the only thing that concerned me was macroeconomic environment, right? And that was my biggest concern, and that's what I said. That was my
Mhm.
caveat: was if we saw a macroeconomic pullback come to fruition, that could derail the collector vehicle markets in 2025. Well, we saw that happen. We didn't see it happen in the first quarter. Saw it happen in the first 2 weeks
Yeah.
of April. So the last 2 weeks, the macroeconomic environment, the first 2 weeks of April changed the landscape drastically with the tariffs, the markets selling off. And when you have those macroeconomic factors take place, essentially you're just, when consumers are concerned about the future of the economy, they just tighten up the belts, spending
Yep.
gets tight. And what happens is you get less buyers in the market. So
Mhm.
though we don't have April data yet. We did have a Mecum sale in Houston 2 weekends ago that happened right after the week that the tariffs were announced, and I could say I don't think the April data is going to be as strong, but we'll talk about that in the next quarter. But as long as the inventory levels in the collector vehicle market moderate, I think we'll be fine. If inventory levels start to pile up, the rest of 2024 is going to be, it's going to
Tough.
be, or the rest of 2025,
Yeah.
to correct myself, is going to be a little bit more
Mhm.
difficult. What's your thoughts there, Brian?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Chris. You've absolutely nailed it. I think that the first quarter was very interesting, for all the reasons stated. I think you saw a lot of solidification in certain types of vehicles. We'll talk about hot and not. But then you also saw consolidation amongst a crew of a confederacy of vehicles that just don't have the heat anymore, don't have that, during COVID buying power behind it. I'm very interested to see and watch. I mean, anecdotally, just watching traffic and buyer levels come through and seller levels come through, it's very interesting to see who's buying, who's selling, and what is coming out into market. But I agree, those inventory levels are going to be the key. I think that's the KPI we'll really want to watch is time on market right now, and see how that affects or plays into things. It's true. I mean, there's no secret to it. If there's volatility in the marketplaces where a lot of people have you know a high amount of their assets placed and there's volatility there, it has implications on the rest of the market. But I think that's going to be very interesting to see how is that top end affected. We talked about some record sales, we talked about those higher averages, but it's going to be where those below average or average level prices, how are those staying stable or changing? That's going to be the interesting part for driving the Q2 market.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple economics. It's
Yeah.
supply, demand, and price. And when you have these macroeconomic pressures and consumers and buyers kind of retreat, that decreases demand.
Mhm.
So as long as the supply, the amount of inventory in the market, stays consistent or moderates, pulls back a little bit, and meets that demand, prices will stay pretty strong. But if we see inventory increase, with
Mhm.
decreased demand, prices are going to come down. It's pure and simple. So our macroeconomic environment here in the US is going to really
Mhm.
tell us what the rest of 2025 is going to yield. And we'll have a clearer picture of that at the end of the second quarter. But let's get into tariffs, man. Everybody wants
Oh,
to talk about tariffs.
yeah,
That's all
right.
anybody wants to talk about. And I appreciate that we recorded this episode in mid-April because we were originally scheduled to record this episode earlier. I was busy with a ton of client trucks and
Cool stuff. Yeah.
transactions. You were busy with Fourbie, your everyday job. You got sick. So it actually all worked out that we're doing this now because we can talk. It's a little bit more timely to talk about
Yeah.
tariffs. There's a lot of misconceptions on how tariffs are impacting the collector vehicle markets. And I think the biggest thing I want to clear up is 25-year and older imports are exempt from the light vehicle 25% US tariff, right? So it's really not going to change. It doesn't impact and this is especially in the truck and 4x4 markets, because I think we see the most imported vehicles in the US. Imported classic vehicles in the US happen in the truck and 4x4 markets, primarily with ROW Land Rovers and Land Cruisers. So if it's 25 years or older, it's not impacted.
You're
We're
fine.
okay, right? So it really doesn't have too much of an impact there. What is not exempt? The standard and universal tariffs are not exempt, but those were norms before all this tariff talk happened. So they were already a constant. So before all this tariff talk happened, like the standard and universal tariffs were already there. They were just norms, right? So they were a part of doing business. So again, no big impact. The other thing that could quite impact it a little bit is we are not exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, right? The reciprocal tariffs are a concern, but again, a lot of the vehicles that are imported are coming from South American countries or Middle Eastern countries where we have better trade. We don't have a huge trade imbalance with those countries anyway. So they're not really, we don't have huge imposed reciprocal tariffs anyway. So overall, if you're looking at buying an imported collector truck or 4x4 in 2025 with the tariffs in place, I don't really think it's going to impact us. It's not really going to change pricing. They're exempt. And the tariffs that they aren't exempt from aren't really that big of a deal because they were either constants before all this talk happened and these changes happened. And the countries that these vehicles are coming from, we don't have a massive trade imbalance anyway. So the reciprocal tariffs aren't anything that I'm really concerned about. Where I am concerned with the tariffs isn't the vehicles themselves; it's the parts.
100%. Yep.
We get a lot in the collector vehicle community. We get a lot of our parts. A vast majority of our parts are produced in Europe and Asia. And that's where we're going to see it hit our wallets. It's not the actual vehicles themselves. It's the parts where we're going to see a massive, a massive change in pricing, especially from China. A lot of our parts come from China. Hey, I'm on my third fuel pump on my Scout because they're made in China and they're not that high quality. So, but we're going to see, I think the parts is where we're going to get hit the most in the collector vehicle. And that's what we really need to worry about. What are your thoughts on tariffs?
I think you've nailed it all. I think the parts is really what's going to come and get us. I think we have a little bit of time, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing some of the latest details, but I think we have a couple more weeks until parts are really affected by the tariffs. That does not mean that it's going to start to trickle. You might see some buyers come in and pull in those parts now just to stock up on inventory. So maybe buy us a couple weeks post implementation, but it's going to be the parts, and you start to be a little disappointed about what that's going to mean to some of the peripheral vehicles that don't have as much supply, right? So yes, your TLCs and your Defenders are probably going to be okay for parts that, relatively unchanged, I should say. But where you might start to see that is some of the niche or more, more offbeat vehicles that we've enjoyed seeing come to market over the past couple of years with some of the extra eyeballs inside of the collector vehicle market. So that's the part that I'm disappointed to see is, how is that going to impact? How's the availability of parts or the viability of owning one of these vehicles going to impact some of the vehicles that we see that are just more specialty?
I mean, just
but it's
hope
going to
things
come down
don't
to
break
parts.
because it's gonna cost
Yeah,
you more to
yeah,
replace that part, hands down, no
exactly.
question. Yep.
Totally.
Uh, let's move into marketplaces. This is your area, man. Like, I want you to start off. Like, what trends? What are you seeing? What's happening in marketplaces? I have my opinions, but you're the one that is the CEO of a marketplace, and the largest, or I should say, the most prominent collector truck or truck and 4x4 marketplace out there. What are you seeing happen out in marketplaces right now?
I mean, like we talked about, the beginning of this quarter was phenomenal. We broke every single one of our records for eyes and buyers and visitors and seller onboarding. We really were running hard and fast to start the quarter, and I think all marketplaces were in a similar boat. Right? There was a lot of emphasis of buyers and sellers coming into market and looking for ways to buy and sell. I think that there are just such fascinating dynamics at play behind the scenes that buyers and sellers may not necessarily always be aware of. I think that they see it or feel it, but don't necessarily have the ability to put their fingers on it unless you're really a nerd about it. But auctions, the traditional online auctions, phenomenal players in there. Similarly with traditional classified listings, very much like ourselves at this point. Um, I think that there's just a big inflection point. There continues to be an inflection point of how are marketplaces modernizing, right? How are they continuing to address how buyers and sellers want to transact? And you're starting to see how that comes to fruition, right? There's no longer the ability just to stand up a marketplace or stand up a auction place, and just because you're niche focused or just because you're um, you know have an auction platform, right? That's not Bring a Trailer, not Cars and Bids, not an affront to them, but just as an alternative. That doesn't happen anymore. That's not a viable model. It has to be, how are you helping aid that or enhance that transparency? And that's always been important to marketplaces. You always want to make sure that there was a reasonable buyer or seller on the other side of the transaction. But instead of that onus necessarily being placed on the individual, they're looking to the marketplace to stand up and make sure that fraud is being detected, that vehicles are actually in the possession of the owners, that there is fair and transparent pay and title transfer. These are components that are becoming table stakes. So it's really fascinating to see the adoption of that and who's pushing those limits, and who's really helping bring that innovation to play. The underlying technology is a hard enough barrier as it is, right? Owning or starting or formulating a marketplace is on paper pretty straightforward, but there's so many nuances that go behind it, so many interdependencies between product types and how users engage. But it's now becoming, did you have the right platform to modernize and make sure that you're a step ahead of where buyers and sellers are? So I think that there's an inflection point of the players that are out there right now. And some people just doing some really good innovative pieces, and there's really great partners and services out there. For instance, we partner with Key Savvy for pay and title transfer, just phenomenal services that help really bring buyers and sellers that comfort and that ease. But again, it's always going to be, but I think the emphasis has increased, especially after you saw Bring a Trailer really in the headlines at the beginning of COVID. It's where's that adoption, or where's that that pushing the barriers? And if players are failing to adapt, that's just the market figuring itself out,
They're
and
going to
you're
get
going to
left
start to see
behind.
some attrition. On the flip side, there are a lot of players out there, and with that becomes a level of, or maybe an increase. You and I have talked about it 100 times on here. Is there consolidation? Is there more of a thinking around how do niche players, how do they really focus on these specific niches? How do they really address the needs of the buyers and sellers? So you're seeing some more conversations around the applicability and the demand from the buyers and the sellers that you're in this space, that you're providing value within this specific niche, not just cramming it with inventory that's just going to get lost. So it's a basic as sorting and filtering, but it's also, how are you engaging the community? How are you out there and partnering with um, nonprofits or different organizations that matter to you. So we're seeing some of that. And then, of course, to start off this quarter, just some big news around another niche focused player in PCAR market. So you're starting to see that conversation of consolidation. You're wondering what's the next move for that group. But yeah, so just a really fascinating place. I think a lot of the factors that we've talked about slow cooking over the last couple months, maybe the last year or so, are really starting to come up. And when you start to see a really strong quarter like we had, those conversations really start to get a little bit faster. So just a fascinating period, and I'm confident that it's going to continue into the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I think the players that are going to separate themselves from the crowd and be successful in the future are the ones that are adapting to what the expectations of buyers and sellers are. And those expectations are a more seamless, more frictionless buying and selling process within the marketplaces, but they also want a level of security and legitimacy. So the marketplaces that don't, confirm ownership or don't have pay and title or are working kind of on the fringe, I think they're going to work themselves out because buyers and sellers are going to have a bad experience and they're going to move on and realize, wow, like that seller was a scam. That person that reached
Yeah.
out to me was, or that buyer was a scam. And that person that reached, and that just doesn't float anymore. It
Yeah.
was a standard back then, but now as marketplaces have really evolved. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
things have just gotten so much tighter. I do agree that the more frictionless, the more seamless the buying and selling experience is, with the more features you have to increase not only security but legitimacy on both sides of that transaction is really what's
Totally.
going to separate the key players and create success in the future. But you mentioned something which I'm glad you brought up, which we saw in the first quarter of this year. PCAR got acquired, so
Yeah.
yeah, that was a great acquisition. And on an overarching, before I even get into PCAR, because most of our truck and 4x4 enthusiasts out there may not even know what PCAR is, but the segment players in the marketplace space are really gaining a lot of market share. So when we talk about the larger players in the space, the Hemmings, the Bring a Trailers, the Cars and Bids, they're great, they're awesome, they're
Totally.
great marketplaces, they bring liquidity,
Mm-hmm.
but enthusiasts have really started to move towards the segment players. Segment players like Fourbie. If you're a truck and 4x4 enthusiast, you don't want to be, crowded with all the noise of all the other stuff. You just want to look at trucks and 4x4s, and that's where you want to buy, that's where you want to sell. You go to Fourbie. If you're into Mercedes-Benz vehicles, you go to MB Market. Right?
Totally.
They
Yep.
just do Mercedes. And then the other player in the space, which a lot of people didn't realize was a Titan, which a lot of us enthusiasts realize, especially the Porsche enthusiasts, is PCAR Market. So PCAR
Mhm.
Market is a segment player. They started out just working on transactions for enthusiast Porsche buyers and sellers. Great platform, and they do non-Porsche, but
Mhm.
their sell through and their metrics on the Porsche vehicles they sell, average sale price, dollar volume, sell through
Amazing.
on the
Yeah.
Porsches is, I mean, the best of any marketplace out there, hands down.
Totally.
The non Porsche stuff that they bring to market, that they have in their marketplace, it does okay, but the Porsche
Sure.
stuff is really where
Yeah.
the hands at. Really hands down where they do a great job. And there were a group of strategic investors that realized that, and while everybody was kind of sleeping, they went in and they picked them up.
Yep.
So it's actually it's a strategic investment fund, a small fund out of New York City called WMAG. They picked up PCAR. I mean, absolutely phenomenal acquisition by those gentlemen.
Totally.
It was obviously PCAR was private. WM AG is private, so we don't know the exact transaction amount, but whatever it was, there's a lot of upside to PCAR, and congratulations to the WM guys for acquiring that. That was an amazing acquisition. The real question is, are they going to start acquiring, or is somebody else going to come out and start acquiring the other segment players,
Right. Right.
going forward? The other big trend I saw in marketplaces, which we've talked about already, is blue chip transactions, those big $6-figure $1 million transactions. Those traditionally were pretty much all happening within the premium, in-person event style event style auctions. Now we're seeing those happen in the online marketplaces. So though a majority of those blue chip transactions are still happening in those premium event style in-lane market auctions, we're seeing market share grow in the online space. We're starting to see some more big dollar transactions happen in the marketplace or in the online marketplaces, and I think we're going to see that trend continue,
Totally.
mostly because of fees. And that brings me to my next point: is not one thing I think buyers and sellers are starting to realize, and if they haven't realized yet, they're through their experiences are realizing not all marketplaces are cut from the same piece of cloth. Not all marketplaces are the same. I mean, different marketplaces, vehicles do better. Certain vehicles do better in different marketplaces. They do worse in other marketplaces. The days of just throwing something up on BAT and it's selling for all the money, those
80%
days
more.
are
Yeah.
over, man. Those
Right.
days are completely over. And I'll use an example. And BAT's great for a lot of stuff, but they're running 800 to 1,000 live auctions at a time. A lot of those auctions are the baby's getting thrown out with the bathwater. They're not getting the views and the eyes that they need. And in certain makes and models, and I'll use an example, like Jeeps. On BAT, Jeeps do not do well. If you
No.
are looking to sell a Jeep on BAT, like, you're not getting all the money. There are
Right.
other marketplaces where you will get way more money.
Mhm.
If you're looking to buy a Jeep on BAT, you're getting a smoking deal. So take
Yeah.
advantage of those sellers that don't realize that that's not a great
Yeah.
place to sell their Jeep. On the flip side, a 200 series Land Cruiser, a low mileage 200 series Land Cruiser on BAT is going to do all the money and then some, right?
Yep.
So if you're a seller, you're crushing it. If you have a 200 series Land Cruiser with under 50,000 miles, put it on BAT, you're going to get all the
Done.
money and then some.
Mhm.
If you're a buyer, you're going to pay a premium, right? So there's a lot of
Totally.
imbalance there. It's really knowing what vehicles do well in the different marketplaces, and a lot of that, for the average seller or buyer that may buy one or two collector vehicles a year, like, you're never going to be able to really grasp that. An expert like myself or other expert, consignment brokers that advise, market, and represent the sale of specialty vehicles. Like, I represent collector trucks and 4x4s. That's what we do. That's the value that we
Right.
bring to the table, is we know which marketplaces, which vehicles do well in different marketplaces to maximize the sale prices.
Totally.
So I think that's the biggest. Those three things. Number one, consolidation of the segment players. We're already starting to see that happen with the WM guys picking up P-Car. Amazing transaction. Blue chip transactions are still happening in the in-person environments, but we're gaining market share in online. And not all marketplaces are the same, man. You need to
Yeah.
know where to buy and where to sell, to maximize your dollar. Hands down, no question.
Mhm.
But I think it's time for us to move into dissecting the collector truck and 4x4 trends, and our little crystal ball outlook for in 2025 for collector trucks and 4x4s. I have my opinions, but I want to hit it to you and see what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Is the short answer, right? Like, I mean, for all the reasons stated, but just seeing some really interesting trends continue to come into fruition. I think that you have, um, you know, an interest in those straight up pickup trucks. That's continuing to be red hot. That's continuing to be, outpacing SUVs or your Jeeps, your Land Cruisers, et cetera. Especially your big people movers, right? We've talked about the excursions. We've talked about the Suburbans. There's actually a really, really, really cool IH that went to auction in Mecum in January. It was one of like 5 ever made. It was a one R140 Woody wagon, and it went for 170 and didn't sell. And it's a tragedy because it's such a beautiful piece. I'm curious what the actual reserve was, but these big people movers continue to be something that just haven't continued to mature with the broader market, or specifically keep up with your big trucks. We've talked a lot about 70s, 80s, early 90s, these being really, really hot trucks. But some of those early ones, especially the ones that are done right, people are not buying the projects anymore. You want something
Couldn't
that
agree.
is
Yep, couldn't agree
uh,
anymore, man.
that is turnkey and ready to go. Maybe a modern powertrain, more modern features, air conditioning. These types of amenities. That's where the value is for buyers and for sellers to move them down the line. Projects just aren't getting what they had. Again, 3-4 years ago, you could throw up a project and it was getting crazy dollars because of the upside, the potential. But you're seeing a lot of really interesting shops come in and maybe build up something nice, but it just quite isn't quite the same as some of those big market builds that we like to see and that are commanding the top dollars. So yeah, your early 90s, late 80s pickup trucks, phenomenal buy. Those are going to continue to be hot, but and those are going to be things that are appealing to the younger buyer, the person who's merging in with a higher household income or a larger share of wallet that they can throw over to an investment grade vehicle or just a classic that they grew up with and wanted to see and are now getting their hands on. So there's going to be no slowing of that truck market. That is going to continue to be resilient. It's been emerging, right? It's been 3 or 4 years. The total market of trucks and 4x4s has been hot, and it has outpaced the broader collector car market. This is the segment to be in by far, even with some data showing some slowing down in certain subsects. But yeah, I think we're going to continue to see that top line grow and outpace even non-trucks and 4x4s. Those crew cab pickups, those OBSs, those square bodies, those are just going to continue to stay red hot.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, the fact of the matter is, my outlook and my crystal ball in 2025 for the collector truck and 4x4 market, the single-handed biggest driver is generational change. That 35 to 55-year-old demographic is coming into a point in their lives where they have discretionary income and they want to buy all the cool stuff that they saw on the highway when they were young
Right.
in the back of their parents' station wagon. And that's collector trucks and 4x4s. The
Right.
collector truck and 4x4 market is going to be the most resilient. It has been the most resilient over the past couple of years, and it has so much legs. We're going to continue to see an immense amount of interest and growth in the collector truck and 4x4 market. I don't see that changing anytime soon. As long as that 25 to 35 or 35 to 55-year-old demographic still has an absolutely insatiable appetite for collector truck and 4x4s, we're not going to see that the market slow down. There are some soft spots, which you actually alluded to, which again goes back to generational change, right? The earlier collector trucks, like the stuff, that is 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s, that still is a shrinking market. And that's a shrinking market because that's really the previous generation's collector trucks and 4x4s. They're
Right.
cool. And
Right.
a lot of those were also two-wheel drives, which two-wheel drives are tough, man. Everybody wants four-wheel drives.
Right.
So the earlier collector trucks, I do think, we're going to see a shrinking market. But again, that's because of generational change. The 35 to 55 demographic doesn't want 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s trucks. What do they want? Late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s trucks.
Right.
So that is the segment of the collector truck and 4x4 market that is going to continue to grow, and really driven by that generational change. There's way more upside to the late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now we're even saying early 2000s, which is wild to me, right?
Right.
There's way more upside than downside in those trucks, whereas I see more downside than upside in the earlier stuff, the 30s, 40s, 50s, early 60s. Again, it's just due to generational change. You also mentioned it too. Resto mods are hot, hot, hot. The days of, people wanting to take on projects, they're over, man. Like, the costs the values don't hold the weight of the costs. It's just the time and the cost, you'll never recoup it if you're doing restorations here in the States, unless you're a dedicated shop with dedicated resources and you
Right.
can do a lot of your stuff in-house, the numbers just don't work. The average guy that wants to do a restoration on his own, the numbers just won't work. They can't work, which is why I think resto mods have really done so well. You have some shops that are doing amazing resto mods,
Yep.
and it's pretty simple. If it looks old and drives like it's new, people
Done.
want it. Resto
Sold.
mods are hot,
Right.
hot, hot.
Mhm.
I talked about this one earlier. Another big trend: two-wheel drives. It's just so tough, man. You
Yeah.
know, it's collector truck and 4x4 buyers. They just don't want two-wheel drives. Not to say
Mhm.
that they're out wheeling these things or using the four-wheel drive. Just when you think of a truck, you think of it as
Right.
four-wheel drives. Like,
Right.
I don't know. What do you think? Two-wheel drives versus four-wheel drives?
It depends what you're looking for, right? I think if you're pulling up to Cars and Coffee and you want your weekend piece, then yeah, you're going to want the bells and whistles. You want the thing that's going to help it stand out. If you're looking for something a little more practical, or want something that is unique but are comfortable, taking it on a daily, I see people okay with understanding what their limitations are or looking for a deal. But it's just that's such a small subsect, and even then, two-wheel drive pickup, you're going to want the practicality, and you're going to want the longevity of something with a four-wheel drive. So, I think you've just nailed it. It's just a tough market. A lot of great deals out there. A lot of really great two-wheel drives out there, but you got to know what you're getting into from a collector standpoint. There's just no comparing the two. It's just
I
not there.
agree that you have to differentiate. I mean, there's a difference between an Apache, a two-wheel drive Apache step
Right.
side that is, an older collector truck versus a square body C10 short bed
Right.
that is bagged and LS swapped, right?
Right.
You have to
Right.
differentiate those two-wheel drive, markets, but through and through, four-wheel drives are by far the most desirable. So,
Not even close.
if
Yeah.
you're looking between a two-wheel drive and a four-wheel drive, say square body, hands down, the four-wheel drive is going to see appreciation. It's going to do a lot better in the market than the two-wheel drive.
Totally. Yep.
The next point I'm going to, trend I see in the collector truck and 4x4 markets, which we've talked to at length in the past, but it's getting worse and the market is getting bloodier. You know what I'm about to bring up?
I think so.
What is it?
Right hands.
Oh, right-hand drives, man. I
Yeah.
feel so bad. All those people that bought JDM and any right-hand and European right-hand drives at the height of the market in 2020, 2021, 2022, paid huge
Yep.
premiums for them. You can't even get rid of them now. Like there's
Yeah.
just
People
no
are
market.
premium. Yeah.
I can't even value them. I've had a couple clients, like I wasn't big on representing right-hand drives in the first place,
Right.
but recently I've had a couple clients come to me and say, "Hey Chris, I have this right-hand drive, I bought it. I know it's not worth what I paid for it, but like, what do you think? Can you help me out?" And I'm like, "I can't. I'm
Right.
sorry." Like
Yeah.
these things aren't even transacting. They're not even
Yeah.
selling through. When they do come to market, they're not even selling through. And where
Yeah.
they are selling through, you don't even want to know. Like, good, clean 80, 100, 80 or 100 series Land
Yep.
Cruisers, right-hand drives.
Yep.
When they are selling through, they're selling through like 8, 10, 12, 13,000. Like
Mm.
what? Like
Brutal.
at that point, don't even sell it. Just keep
Right.
it, enjoy it, love it. And that's what I've been telling my clients that are coming to me
Yeah.
with right-hand drives. Just don't even bother selling them. Just
Yeah.
keep it, love it, enjoy it. You're never going to get what you had out of it, but if you do sell it, it's you're just giving the thing away. I mean,
Totally.
so for all of those that are tempted by the values in the right-hand drive market, stay away because you're never you can't even sell the thing right now.
Yeah.
And for all of you that have a right-hand drive, just keep it and enjoy it. Don't even bother selling it. I mean,
Yeah.
there's way more downs. I mean, how much more downside can you have it?
Right.
$10,000-$12,000, but like
Right.
there's just no market
Yeah.
for these things right now. Americans don't want right-hand drives. That's it.
No, and I think it's crazy. You absolutely nailed it. That people were paying premiums because you had these really cool spec pieces, but that market went so quickly. It was a flash in the pan before you started getting more serious GCC spec imports coming in. So, we're seeing sellers all up and down the East Coast that we work with really closely, like Car Cave USA and others that are just importing from, Gulf countries that have left-hand drive and really unique spec vehicles that are clean and well taken care of. I mean, clean. And they're just been importing them that way. And it was the same price as what your RHD was. But you're getting something a little more practical or daily usable.
Yeah. So for all you out there that have right-hand drives in your collections, I'm sorry. Just love them and enjoy them. And if you're tempted to buy one, just don't. Just please don't.
And
Please don't. And if you do, don't call me, please. The other one I'm really seeing, the other big trend I'm seeing in the collector truck and 4x4 markets, which you alluded to earlier, we spoke a little bit about, is quality is always going to trade on the top end of the market, right? And junk will always trade on the bottom end of the market. That wasn't always true for a long time in the collector truck and 4x4 markets. I think as this new generation of buyer is coming in, they're getting way more educated. They understand what they're looking at, and they really are doing an amazing job on differentiating quality and garbage, right? So for the same reason we just talked about how, just your average project isn't selling because there's no market for it. It doesn't make sense. Low quality drivers that may, have crazy miles, tired powertrains, bodies that are a little compromised with some rust, like that stuff. If you are looking to sell it, it's awesome, but don't expect to get a big dollar for it.
Right.
It's going to trade on the bottom end or below the bottom end of the market, hands down.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you have a good, high quality, fully refurbished or fully restored vehicle, truck and 4x4, expect to get on the top end and maybe actually hit a record. Right. Yeah. Because that's where the buyers are. That's where the market is. People are willing, truck and 4x4 buyers, collector truck and 4x4 buyers are willing to pay a premium for quality, right? Hands down, no question. So I'm seeing a huge, a really big spread between quality, prices and quality.
Totally.
And then there's definitely some buying opportunities and inefficiencies in the market. Deals aren't dead. They're just, you have to look for them. You have to look for them in different marketplaces, know what different stuff is. Like, for example, like a right-hand drive 80 series Land Cruiser might look like a good deal, but it's not a good deal. Right. Whereas a GCC left-hand drive that has 250,000 kilometers on it, 80 series, that could be a good deal. Right. So they're really understanding the market, is key. But there are definitely some deals and some inefficiencies out there in the truck and 4x4 markets. You just have to know what to look for. And, those deals are not dead. But let's move into what everybody really wants to hear about, and that's what's hot and what's not. So I'm going to start with my what's hot list. And I already alluded to this earlier. Heritage resto mods, man. I mean, heritage resto mods are just so hot in the market right now. If it looks old and it drives like new, if it's an investment quality frame off, powertrain swapped, full restoration with modern amenities and creature comforts, air conditioning, power windows, LS or Coyote powertrain on a roadster shop, coil spring suspension chassis with, 4-wheel disc brakes, 6-piston 4-wheel disc brakes all the way around. Like, and it looks good. It's hot, and everybody wants it. Those were the big transactions we saw in the first quarter, and we've seen actually for the past couple quarters. I'm a buy across the board in all resto mods right now, hands down, especially in the secondary market. Seeing a little inefficiency between the primary market and the secondary market. And what I mean by the primary market is the build shops selling them, doing the restoration, doing these resto mods and selling them to consumers versus the secondary market, meaning they're out in the market, they're out advertised in a marketplace. Like I'll give you a couple examples, like ECD, East Coast Defenders, LS Swap. These things are immaculate. They're
Yeah.
beautiful. They have, a lot of them have air ride suspension, full LS powertrains. I mean, they're just gorgeous.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some of those trade in the market, in the secondary markets for, 140, 150, 160, 170,000.
Yeah.
And the person selling them paid 250,
Right.
260, 270, 280 for them. So,
Yep.
there's a lot of great build shops, and there's a lot less variables when you're buying them directly from the build shop, because it's been done right. Nobody's driven it. But I mean, when you're talking about $100,000 swing, I'll save the $100,000 and take a little bit more risk buying in the secondary market. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Getting into makes and models, first gen, Action Line K5s are just absolutely on fire. Those trucks have led the way on, really bringing collector trucks and 4x4s to the forefront of being blue chip transactions. Those things are trading 300, 400, 250, 300, 350, 400,000 out in the market. And they deserve all that money. And I still see upside there. Hands down, no question. And just so our listeners are clear, Action Line GMs are 69 to 72. The K5s are the Chevy Blazers or the GMC Jimmies. The GMCs are a little bit more, a little rare, but they're all doing right around the same numbers. And then I'm going to throw second gen Ford Broncos into there too, into what's hot. I mean, second gen Ford Broncos, 78, 79, 2 years only. They're just awesome trucks. There aren't a ton of them out there. I'm a buy across the board on all those, especially if they're resto modded. But if you're looking for a K5 and you're looking for some value, a lot of people don't realize the early second gen K5s, right? Which was really when the square body came out, real early. There was 2 years, which was 73. I think it was actually 2 or 3 years, 73, 74, 75. Okay. Though they're square body K5s, they still had the open top. So I don't think it was still 75 or 76 when they had the half cabs. So if you want that open top look, but you're looking for some value, look for the 73, 74, 75s. Though they're the square bodies, they still have the open top. I see some value there. But smart. I'm a buy across the board on all K5s, especially all Action Line K5s and all second gen Ford Broncos. The other one that it's what's hot right now, and you said it earlier, crew cab pickups, man, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wants crew cab pickups. Specifically the Action Line GMs and the square body GMs. The K10s, K20s, right. The 3+3s, and then also the Ford F-250s, the high boys, which was 67 to early 77. It went between the dent side and bump side generations. If it's a crew cab right now, if it's a crew cab pickup and it's resto modded, it's doing all the money and then some. I'm a buy across the board there, no question, hands down. I'd be a bit weary though though I love them, I'm a buy across the board. I think the top end of the crew cab pickup truck market is a little bit lower than like a second gen Bronco or an Action Line K5, just because the pickup trucks, they have kind of a lower threshold on the top end of the market, whereas like a Hogan built K5 resto modded, that'll do 350, 400 all day long. Whereas like the square body 3+3 that's LS swapped, fully restored, frame off, like there's a top end of the market. There are only so many collectors that have an appetite for pickups and have the ability to spend big six figures. But that's my only reservation there with what's hot. And then I'll finish up with what's hot is Scouts. I've been talking about Scouts for a while. Sadly, 80s and 800s, the older ones, they're getting a little softer. Hold them. I'm not much of a buy on them. Maybe sell them. Whereas the most popular scouts by far are the short wheelbase Scout 2s, hands down, 71 to 80, especially the resto mods. Where there's value in the Scout market, and I've mentioned this before, is the Terras and the Travelers, the 76 to 80, the long wheelbase Terras and Travelers. But I've been talking about that for the past couple quarters, and I'm starting to see those prices creep up, by the way. So there's not as much value as there was this time last year or last summer, but there's still value to be had in the longer wheelbase Scouts, the Terras and the Travelers. But with the Scouts, I'm going to give one asterisk. Similar to the first gen Bronco market, when first gen Broncos got really hot, everybody wanted them a few years ago. You saw a lot of Johnny come lately, marginal quality. I don't want to call them resto shops, but shops come out of the woodwork, and everybody started building them. I'm starting to see that with Scouts right now. I'm starting to see a lot of Johnny come lately builders that are chasing the buck and chasing the trend. So if you're buying a resto modded Scout, make sure you're buying it from the right people, from the right build shops, because I'm starting to get weary of some stuff out there right now.
Totally. Yep. Yeah, it's such a shame too, seeing some of those. We've seen quite a few 80s flop on auctions, which is just a tragedy because they're beautiful and really really well done, but they just don't have the same allure as some of their brothers.
Yep. So what's in your what's hot list, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely echo all of those points. I won't this time plug the Ram Charger. I've been trying that one so hard for the past couple of quarters, thinking it would catch on, but just hasn't done the trick as much as I thought it would. But what I am seeing is those early Rams do really well and really come into their own. I love the trend line, that sales trend line that they have right now. We're seeing appreciation in that specific style, specifically once you get the Cummins engine in there. Those are doing really, really well. To your point too, you have to be very careful who you're buying from. There were some rust issues, as there was with anything in that era. But I love the line of those early Rams and seeing where they're coming in. And I think that those are going to continue to be really, really hot. They're just, the volumes are coming in a little bit higher too, meaning there's more coming to market, but nowhere close to your Ford and your Chevys of similar eras. So really, really like where those Rams are coming in. And even as you're getting a little bit later into mid 90s, late 90s, those are just continuing to be hot if you're buying the right piece. I also really like, and you can yell at me if this is not a classic, but those early Silverados, those first gen Silverados, and
hands down, the GMT 400s and the GMT 800s, there's a ton of value and they're getting hot, man.
Yeah, I mean, we can't keep an LBZ on the site. That's that 6.6 liter Duramax, which is fantastic. But then on top of that, you have the 6-speed Allison transmission. So people just absolutely love these. Plus, you're pre some of the emissions components. There's still a CAT. There's still EGR, but those are just, we can't keep them on the site long enough. Sellers are just going right through them, and that blends that line of, here's a classic. If you know it, you know it. With, I could daily this, and this is going to more than reasonably serve my needs versus something brand new. So, that those two markets, I'll just add those two to what you've added in terms of hot. Just, I love to see the upside of those Rams, but those early Silverados, just, again, name your own price.
Yep, you bring up a good point. The Dodges do get lost in the mix sometimes. We talk so much about GMs, we talk so much about Fords, but we kind of don't talk about the Dodges a lot. But I agree. I'd put the Dodges in the what's hot list, especially the crew cab, the early Dodge pickups. But you brought up the Ram Chargers and the sister Plymouth Trail Duster. Dude, open cab. Ram Chargers are definitely hot. If you can get your hands on a Plymouth Trail Duster, the problem is you can't get your hands on them. They didn't make a lot of them. They were shorter run than the Dodge Ram Charger. But if you can get your hands on a Plymouth Trail Duster, by all means. And if you can
So
get it at a
cool.
decent
Yeah,
number, there's no downside there with the Plymouth Trail Dusters, because that's a if you know type of truck,
totally.
man. Hands
Yeah.
down.
And not the trail duster, but those Ram Chargers, you're talking teens,
Mhm.
20s. So it's a tremendous value for somebody wanting to enter into that market too.
And the later Ram Chargers, the ones that didn't have the removable top, that are the fixed top, I mean, you can get those things at really good prices right now,
Yeah.
hands down, no question. But that's what's hot. Let's move into what's not on my list. I'm not going to talk anymore about it. Obviously, right-hand drives. Don't buy them, don't sell them. I don't know what to tell you to do with them. Early two-wheel drive pickups. Again, we talked about that. They're not as desirable because they're just generational change. I talked about this one last quarter. I call them the tiny PP trucks, which are the big honking,
Yeah.
the Hummer H1s, the Humvees, the Chevy Kodiaks, the GMC Top Kicks, the Ford F650 super trucks, like just the aggressive, massive trucks. They've just fallen out of favor. They're not a thing anymore.
Yep.
The Humvees, which are the AM General, the military issue, the Kodiaks, the Chevy Kodiaks, GMC Top Kicks, and the Ford F650s. Like, I mean, you can hold them. I wouldn't buy them. I see more upside. I see more downside than I do upside. If you're selling them, sell them now, because I definitely see more downside. Where I do see some opportunity, and one of those inefficiencies in there, is in the Hummer H1s.
Mhm.
I'm starting to see a lot of really clean Hummer H1s with low
Yeah.
mileage come into the market. And I'm not saying they're selling through, but the ones that are selling through and the ones that aren't selling through are high bidding in like the
Mhm.
50, 60 grand, man.
Yeah.
Dude,
Solid.
you can get,
Yeah.
like, I just saw a black, like 50, under 50,000 mile. I think it was a 99 or 2000. There's a weird engine issue
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the pre 2000s, but it was like a 99, 2000. Um, Immaculate, clean, was coming out of the original owner's collection, had like less than 50,000 miles on it. And this
Yeah.
thing made its rounds through all the marketplaces, all the auctions, and it never high bid above like 50, 55,000. I think it's
Wild.
still out there. But that tells you that's where the market is. So if you find a realistic seller that's willing to let one of those things go, I'm a buyer there. At 50 grand for a clean, low mileage H1 all day long. The H1
Hmm.
Alphas with the Dormax,
Oh yeah.
which were later. Those things are the most
Yeah.
desirable, but they were desirable, in the 150 to $170,000 range. Now you can get those things in the 70, $80,000 range.
Yeah.
So
Wild.
I'm
Half
still more
off.
of a
Yeah.
buyer of a good, clean, low mileage H1 at 50 grand than I am a an H1 Alpha with the Dormax at
Right.
70,000 or
Mhm.
80,000. But I think that's where one of those inefficiencies is right now,
Yeah.
is in the H1s. Next one makes me kind of sad because it hits close to home. Jeep CJs, man. Jeep CJs have had a tough go. Flat fenders, the CJ2s, CJ3s, you can sell them, you can buy them. Just again, the generational change, those early CJs, just there isn't a lot of demand. They're not fun to drive. They're cool to look at, but
Yeah.
you can get them cheap. Like there's just no upside there in any way whatsoever. CJ5s, I love CJ5s, but they're just less desirable than CJ7s and
Yeah.
CJ8s. They built them from 1955 to 1983. That's a lot of inventory out there.
Ton. Yeah.
Not a lot of them survive, but they built so many that there's so many survivors out there. But if you want a short wheelbase CJ, I go with a CJ5, and you can find fully restored short wheelbase, CJ5s in like the 10, 12 grand range. There's some opportunity there. There's not upside, but
Right.
for 12
Right.
grand for a fully restored later, CJ7. So I mean, when I say later, like post 76 CJ5, excuse me, I correct myself, CJ5, there's some opportunity there.
Totally.
Let's talk about CJ7 and CJ8s real quick. CJ7 and CJ8s saw some difficult markets. We saw a ton of inventory come into the market last summer with CJ7s, CJ8s, a lot of inventory. And a lot of that inventory was low quality CJ7s and CJ8s. And what happened was the baby got thrown out with the bathwater, and it really took down the good high quality CJ7s and CJ8s that were out there. And I'm gonna throw some analytics behind that, right? So though there's a glut of poor quality inventory that's coming into the market, it started to come into the market about 9-12 months ago. Where the market stands today, right now, there in the published markets, there are 70 available CJ7s in the published markets, right? 70, does that sound like a lot? Does that sound like a little? Well, to put that into perspective, in the last 12 months, in the trailing 12 months, we've only seen 112 CJ7s successfully transact. So to have 70 available in the market right now, that's like 7.5 months of available inventory. CJ7 available inventory in the market.
Crazy.
The supply-demand equation is completely imbalanced in the buyer's favor. But right now, if you're in the market for a CJ7, now is the time to buy. And now is the time to buy, especially the good high quality stuff, until the market starts realizing, until less inventory, the inventory starts getting sopped up and the market starts realizing, oh, these high quality CJ7s that are out there are underpriced. You need to be looking at high quality CJ7s right now. There's an immense amount of opportunity. I'm a huge buy there. And my same thing with CJ8s, right? And I'll say CJ8s, right now there's 16 available CJ8s in the market, right? Doesn't sound like a lot, right? But only 31 have transacted in the trailing 12 months, right?
Jeez.
So that's like 6 months of available inventory. So even though there's only 16 available out in the market, there's like 6 months of available CJ inventory right now.
Wow.
And in my opinion, right now is the best buying opportunity I have seen in the past 5 years for CJ8s. If you find a good quality CJ8 out in the market right now and you can buy it at the right price, you would be absolutely crazy not to buy it. So though I'm super bullish on the buying opportunity in CJ7s, there's a lot more CJ7s than there are CJ8s out there. If you ever in a million years thought you wanted to own a CJ8, now is the time to buy. Hands down, no question. Right. So though they're on my what's not list, that what's not is creating opportunity, especially with high quality CJ7s, CJ8s. And then these two, I said I wouldn't talk about anymore, but the markets are just so imbalanced and there's such a mess and there's just so much inventory. And I'll keep it brief. ROW Land Rovers and Gen 1 Broncos. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I promised our listeners I would stop talking about them and get them off the what's not list. But like, the markets are just so imbalanced. There's so much more supply than there is demand. And I think a lot of that is they're just falling out of favor. They were really trendy for a while. Like a lot of my clients at Classic 4x4 are, a lot of New York City finance bros. And, few years ago, everybody wanted a first-gen Bronco or a restored Defender at their house in the Hamptons, their house in Nantucket, their house in their house down the shore, their house in the Hudson Valley. But to quote a client of mine who runs a trading desk in New York, he called me in December, and I think I may have told this story already. And he's like, "Dude, we got to get rid of my Defender." He bought a investment quality ROW, fully restored Defender, still at a 300 TDI. And I'm like, "Dude, why? Like, you haven't had it that long and you bought it at the top of the market. Why you want to get rid of it?" He goes, "We're getting our bonuses in March. And one of my junior guys on my desk, who's like a second year, said the first thing he's doing the second he gets his bonus is buying a Defender." He goes, "That combined with the fact that all summer long I was taking my kids to the ice cream shop after dinner, and there were 5 in the parking lot at every single ice cream shop in the Hamptons." He's like, "I'm done with them." He's like, that kind of buyer, they want what nobody else has. And the problem is everybody has ROW Defenders and Gen 1 Broncos. And there's so many build shops out there. I love them.
Yeah.
but there's definitely more downside than there is upside in those. So I'm done
Yeah.
talking about those. Right? What's on your what's not list?
I couldn't agree more with your list there. I think, and I'm glad you caveated the ROW for the defender, because, seeing some of those NAS, those do pretty well. Those have some staying power. We have got a gorgeous one on the site right now. It's a 97, which was the last year. And it's an automatic, which is really desirable. I think that was the only year that they did
Yeah,
the
97 was
automatic.
all automatics. Yep.
So really great piece, but that's where, the distinction to your point is it's the car that people like, right? People like the 90, but it has that distinction to it. So you have to find that unique piece. Something that also falls into that category is another of the same ilk, the Range Rover Classic. Love those cars personally, beautiful cars. There's a glut of inventory. And unless you have something that is relatively unique, it's just not moving. Now, again, there's exceptions. We got a gorgeous RRC on the site right now, 55K original miles, really well priced, compared to the broader market, but just a really tough market to move from. There's a lot of refurbished versions out there that are not necessarily addressing some of the core issues of that vehicle, whether it's powertrain related or even just undercarriage, et cetera. So you have really nice seats, you got the new carpeting, but you're going to be broken down in a week. So there's that reliability question. I think it goes back to where we are on the broader market of what's hot. People don't want to necessarily tinker. They want to keep moving down the road. So that's been a tough one. And I'll just mention one last time, those big people movers. You mentioned the Hummers. I'll add in earlier Suburbans have just gotten slaughtered. Beautiful cars, some really great work done out there. The top end ones will continue to do well, but those prices are coming down. Same things with something like the Excursion or similar. And I mentioned that IH earlier, that didn't do quite as well as I think the market anticipated. So anything that's big, bulky, and maybe even underpowered, it's just not getting to where it needs to be. But again, caveat being, top end is always going to continue to do well.
Yep. Quality will always sell, and it'll sell at the top end of the market. The question isn't, will it sell at the top end of the market? What is the top end of the market?
Yeah.
And sellers have to be realistic with what actually is the top end of the market, because first gen resto modded, Coyote swapped, Gen 1 Broncos, the top end of the market was 250 to 300 3 years ago. Now the top end of the market, 140 to 170. So, yeah, 3 years ago, it may have done 270. Today, the top end of the market is 170. That's a big difference. So it's just being realistic with what the top end of that market is.
Mm-hmm.
So awesome. Well, Brian,
Completely.
I can't thank you enough for joining me for this episode, and always joining me for the quarterly market updates. And for all of our listeners and our audience out there that isn't familiar with Fourbie Exchange, make sure you check out their site. It's Fourbie, FOURBIE.com. Follow them on all the social channels and YouTube at Fourbie Exchange. That's, if you're looking for unique, classic, and collector trucks and 4x4s, that's where you got to go, is Fourbie Exchange. So thanks a lot again, man.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Have a good day.